Another successful client is Yekaterina Orlova, who makes children's clothing.
I'm very grateful to the bank that they gave me the loan, because if we hadn't received the first loan, it's quite possible we would have closed down, because the rent was on the increase all the time. We wouldn't have been able to pay the rent and develop the business, working on just the 3 machines we had at the time. The enterprise would have closed down. We wouldn't have existed. Of course it's helped a lot. Without it we couldn't have developed. Our output would have remained the same. With the new industrial machines we have new opportunities. For example, we're now knitting clothes for teenagers as well as children. We've also started to produce clothes without special motifs. This was a speciality before, and the product was finished at home. Now we have a wider range, so using the new equipment, we've increased our output.
Nadezhda, Tatiana and Yekaterina have been able to expand their businesses more quickly because of such loans. The clients and the EBRD are happy with the partnership, but how have the Russian banks responded to their part in the program?
The banks have different reactions. I mean, most of the banks do want in the program now. When we started, we were absolute beggars. Banks had no trust in small enterprises. These had been illegal before. So we had to first convince banks at all of the target group. Once we received a good reputation in Russia because of good repayment, banks welcomed us. But when it came to really day-to-day work, we found out there were tensions all the time, because we were coming into these institutions and we were saying, you need to change the way that you work. If you're going to do this profitably, if you're going to do this efficiently, you have to have different procedures.
We had initially very bad experiences with existing bank staff that were nominated by some of our partner banks, because most of these bankers, so to speak, were used to a very comfortable banking environment where they didn't really have to leave the bank for anything except to go home in the evening. Their job was usually very heavily based on analyzing documents, balance sheets and things like that. We found it very difficult to convince and entice these kinds of bankers to go out and visit customers, especially in the Siberian winter, which is an additional dimension of microbanking here in Russia that is harder than in most more exotic places. We also found that many bankers from inside the banks had a real bias against the target group, maybe for social reasons. Bankers, I think, in Russia are one of the few people who really represent the middle class or upper middle class, which in Russia has almost evaporated. It's not really there anymore. It's one of the biggest social problems of this country. And like many other people who've moved up from lower class to middle class, they try to distinguish themselves from their former background by not wanting to deal with the lower class anymore.
Banks certainly seem to feel that they have brought something positive to the program.
The
program was very important to Russian banks in terms of training the original loan officers. Because when the program appeared in Russia in 1995, there was no real experience of giving loans to small business, neither with the old type of banking system, the Sberbank of Russia, nor with the banks of the new generation, such as Rossiyskiy Kredit, Inkombank and SBS Agro. None of us had that experience, and everyone was regarding it as a sort of schooling, learning process. In putting it all into practice, we did find some errors in the program itself. Not perhaps errors as such, but they didn't take into consideration the specific character of Russia in terms of the Russian legal system and the lack of an infrastructure when investigating a borrower. The banks actually added something to the program, especially evaluating the creditworthiness of a borrower.
Trust plays a very important role in the whole process of institution building, because institution building usually will include at some point changing the objectives and the mindset of senior management and the owners of an institution. And this can't work without trust. And since we usually have very little time here to build up trust, quite often we take a real gamble with some of our partners, and they take a gamble with us, and we try to do our best to establish this trust as quickly as possible. And even though we may often have very big differences of opinion, we may fight about branch credit limits, we may fight about approval systems, procedures, all sorts of things. We do lots of things in order to develop this trust in our partners. And I think on average we've been rather successful with that.
But how successful has the program been in creating something sustainable, and does it contribute to poverty alleviation?
The Russia Small Business Fund is going to be here permanently, and the reason for this is not the European Bank's presence. It's not that micro and small enterprises are socially good. It's that the program is profitable for banks. We have some branches of banks that are running only because of this program, because each month they're making enough from interest income to cover all of the expenses of the whole branch. This makes the banks wake up and take notice and not only want to keep the program going, but to expand it within branches and to also take it to every region of Russia. So as a business and as part of their business strategy, the banks have added micro and small lending.
While the program has been profitable and attractive to the private sector, it has been difficult to create and maintain long-term interest in microfinance programs.
There is a lot of mystery surrounding the failure of commercial banks to become involved in microcredit, because now there are several thousand microcredit operations around the developing world, most of which are profitable, some of which are highly profitable. If you ask why they don't, it must be a question of risk as perceived by those finance houses. I stress as perceived by those finance houses because the real risk, if you average it across all microfinance organizations, seems to be quite small. But microfinance is a business which is new to most finance houses, which seems a little bit strange, and which seems also to be uneconomic because it involves making lots of small loans to thousands and thousands of unknown clients. And so that description of the nature of the business makes it look as though it's very risky and very unprofitable.
Microfinance is being employed in a wide variety of places and has become an important tool in institutional development. As we have seen, microfinance programs can take very different forms and can have different priorities. Some, like the Shreyas and Rasta programs in Kerala, integrate social development objectives such as gender issues, education and training. Others, like the EBRD program in Russia, are more commercial and focus on developing longer-term financial sustainability with priority given to changing banking structures. Questions about real contributions to poverty alleviation and empowerment and the longer-term interest of the private sector may remain, but microfinance has clearly already had a major impact on thinking about economic and social development.